So we are still discussing the Machlekes Rav and Shmuel, right? It started right after the Mishnah, where Rav says, "Harei ze mekach tois, basaru bazlina." Rav says, even if you have a chazak, it started with the actual case was moicha shalach avei, right? Someone sold a shirt to his friend, and it turned out that it was a shirt that was goring, it was a muad, and therefore now it has to be slaughtered. So it's worth less than, or like we said, even if it's worth the same, but now he's forced to slaughter it. And the question is, do we say that since most shvarim are not nanchanim, they don't need to be slaughtered. So this buyer was defrauded, and he can go back to the seller and say, "This is not what I expected. The roiv is that this is what I expected, and so give me back my money." So Rav says that's the way it goes. It's a roiv. But Shmuel says we don't go bas roiv in moment to take away money from a mufsik. Right now, the seller has the cash. You're going to take away his cash. You can't do based on a roiv that most oxen are not chonim, are not gorers. You can't take away money based on that. Okay, so now we're on the top of Tzadi Gimel Amud Aleph, continuing with the rayas one way or the other. Tashma, second line from the top on Tzadi Gimel Amud. Tashma, shar shanagach asapara, shar that shtacht, it gored a cow. Benimtza over b'tzid. So they were the only two animals in the pasture, this ox and the cow. Benimtza over b'tzida. And we find that the para the next morning is dead, and the ox is looking very guilty, and the cow is dead, and there's also a dead uvra. And the uvra, it's clear, was not full term. You could see it wasn't gored, but it's a dead uber. But any day, actually, we don't know if the animal, the cow gave birth prematurely to a stillborn vlad, and therefore the owner of the ox is not responsible for this dead fetus, this dead stillborn calf, or it's the goring that caused the cow to miscarry, and therefore it's the financial responsibility of the owner of the ox. So we say Mishalm Chatzi Nezek L'Para, he pays Chatzi Nezek L'Para. We're talking about a shar tam, so you only pay Chatzi Nezek. V'rivya L'Vad, and you only pay a quarter for the Vlad, because the Vlad, first of all, even if it was caused by the ox, it's only Chatzi Nezek, because we're talking about a tam. And there's a suffix of whether it was caused by him, so therefore he only has to pay a quarter. He pays half. Why don't we say, let's go after Roiv Paris? Roiv Paris, Bisabris V'Yeldus. Normally, most animals give birth, and they when they're Misabra, and they give birth. So why are we assuming that either the animal miscarried, like we're looking at it as half and half, right? Either the animal miscarried, or the animal caused it to die, caused the calf to die from the negicha. It's very unusual for an animal to give birth to a stillborn calf. You see a dead calf, why would you assume that the cow gave birth to a stillborn? Normally, when they give birth, they live. So therefore, the roiv seems to indicate that it's coming because of the negicha. So this is a raya to Shmuel that we don't go basa roiv. We're coming to take away from a mufsik, right? You're trying to take away from the owner of the ox and say you have to pay for the negicha of this vlad, and we're saying we're not respecting the roiv because we don't go after roiv in a moment. So Gemara Hasim Safdala said no, because there's another wrinkle that we haven't considered. It's not such a simple roiv that you could say that most of the time when a cow gives birth, it's going to be a healthy calf. Also, there's two ways that the animal could have caused this para to lose the calf. One way is that he was negeach, that the ox gored the cow and caused the calf to die. But it's also possible that it approached it from the front. The cow saw the bull charging at her, and because of the fright, the cow gave birth to a stillborn calf. And that would not be the responsibility of the owner of the ox, because that's a groma, that's not a direct cause. It means you're responsible, a person who's responsible if his ox gores a cow and causes damage. But he's not responsible if his ox scares a cow and it's stillborn. So we have to, you were saying it's a roiv. Chances are it was because of negicha, because it's unlikely that a cow would give birth to a stillborn. But over here, there's an additional factor that mitigates on the side that it was stillborn because of the cow, that maybe it was because of fright. And that would also not be the responsibility of the act. So it's not really a roiv. It's again back to half and half. So that's why it remains that he only has to pay a quarter. So let's say this machlek is Rav and Shmuel of whether we go basar roiv by maminus or not is a machlek is Tanai. Shasha roiv, a shar that was in the pasture, and then we find a dead. This is a group of oxen that were all in a pasture together, and you come in the morning and you find a dead shar in the group. Even though it turns out that one of the shvarim in this group, the cowboys were watching the oxen of a bunch of different, the steers or the oxen of a bunch of different owners, and one of them, it turns out, is a muad. So there's a chazaka that the one that's a muad, that's already gored 3 times, that's the one who did it. We find one dead ox, and one of the oxen is a muad. So even though it turns out that this animal was gored, and one of the animals is a muad to gore, or it's the animal, the dead animal is bitten, and one of the animals is a muad to bite. We don't say that we can assume that the animal that's a muad to gore or to bite is the one that caused the damage. That's a Tanakama. We don't say the chazaka dictates that we follow the chazaka. Vacha says, if you have a gamal that's mating amongst the gemalim, and the gemalim, when they mate, would be very aggressive, and they would occasionally kill each other. And then we find one gamal that was harg. He says in that case, we say, we do follow the chazaka, and we say the one that was killed by the animal, by the camel that was aggressive at that time. So Savrua, the Rub of Chazaka Kiyadad, the Gemara is suggesting, and these two cases are not the same as what we were talking about. This machlek is not Kamar Bacha, but whether we ascribe the damage to the animal that is muhsuk to do so, it's not exactly the same as what we've been talking about whether we go basar. The Gemara is saying l'chayra Rub and Chazaka should be equivalent. If we follow Chazaka to determine whether someone is chayav, we should also follow Roiv. So the Tanakama who says that we don't follow the Chazaka should be like Shmuel who says we don't follow Roiv. And Rav Acha who says we do follow the Chazaka should be like Rav in our machlekes who says we do follow Roiv. So Ruah de Ruba Chazaka Yadan. Nulema Rav Dama Rav Acha Shmuel Dama Ketanakama. Amalach Rav says no. Rav who says that we follow Roiv, he says, I know I feel Tanakama. I would say, even though I say you follow Roiv, I would agree with the Tanakama that says we don't follow Chazaka. Ad kan lekama Tanakama hasam ela de lo yazinu bas Chazaka. All the Tanakama says we don't follow Chazaka, alabasaruba adlina, but we would follow a Roiv. Says that a Roiv is stronger than a Chazaka. A Chazaka is just, this is what he's done in the past, but it doesn't dictate that it's more than a majority chance that it's done it now. It's saying that it has a tendency to do something. That means in the case of let's say the animal that was a muad, so that's a Chazaka. He says it could be that we'll follow a Roiv in the case of a shar ayas where and we said that most people who buy an animal are buying it that they want to use it as an ox. They want to use it for work. They don't want to shecht it. So we say that's a roiv. So we can assume that that's the case. Doesn't mean that we could assume that we follow a chazaka. A chazaka is not as strong as a roiv. The chazaka that a muad animal is the one that killed. Just there's a bunch of other animals. Just because there's a chazaka, so the Rashbam actually says two svaras. First of all, that in general a roiv is more stronger than a chazaka. Chazaka just says there's a tendency to do something. It's not as strong as saying there's a roiv. A roiv means that the majority of the time that happens. He also says another svara. He says over here there's a roiv. Rashbam says there's a roiv the other way, right? Most you want to say that we go basar the chazaka that this animal was the one who killed it, but there's a roiv the other way that most of the animals that were there wasn't not. There's a roiv that was one of the other animals. What does he say? Basaru as the ruba adif mechazaka, the ikalamema the roiv shvarim sheba'olam nakhu l'kachpat. More likely, that's one of the roiv is that a different animal did it, not this one, even though this one is chazak. So so Rav says I don't necessarily have to be confined to say like I say like Rav Acha. I could even be like the Tanakama. And Shmuel will say the other way around. Even though I hold by mum and we don't go bas roiv, but I would say bas chazak we do go. The who gufa muchzak. Muchzak is in this particular animal. When we look at a chazaka, we're saying that this animal has a tendency. So it defines this animal as something that's likely to have caused the damage. But roiv is a more abstract concept. Roiv doesn't dictate what happened with this animal. Roiv is telling you that when you look at all the animals in the world, we could say, let's say in the case of Rav and Shmuel, that was saying whether the person who bought an animal did he intend to use it for plowing, or did he intend to use it for shchita? So you could say roiv, let's say 60% do it for plowing, but it doesn't mean that this particular person meant to do it for plowing. Maybe he was from the 40% that do it for shchita. So it's not on one particular person. A roiv takes into account everyone. A chazak is more focused on this particular cow or this particular shar that's at issue. We're saying he's a muad, so that dictates us exactly what he is. So this svaras both ways to be mechalak between you could say chazaka is stronger than roiv, or chazaka is weaker than roiv, and therefore the machlekes tanoim that we've brought the gabi chazaka is not the same machlekes that Rav and Shmuel have, whether we follow a roiv. That's the svar. Tashma. So we went through a whole blot from this machlekes Rav and Shmuel, which had nothing to do with we hadn't brought it back to what we're talking about. And finally, we're going to come back to our Mishnah in Hamaycha Paris. Tashma, Hamaycha Paris l'chaverei. Our Mishnah says someone who sold Paris to his friend, v'zaron v'lo yitzachai, and the person who bought it, planted it, and nothing grew, v'afilu zara pishna, even if he planted pishna. Pishna is something that 90% of the flax that is sold is used to replant. Very little of it is used to eat. So, ein chayiv b'achriyus. It's not flax seeds, at least, right? It's not to, when you grow flax seeds, it can be grown to the flax that you make into clothing. The seeds themselves are not, you don't make that into linen. The seeds are either eaten for, like people who eat organic stuff, they sprinkle it on the yogurt, or else it's planted. So 90% of the flax seed is used for planting. Not so many people, not that people don't eat that much. So even if you zara pishtan, so the person who bought it can say, listen, this is a roiv that I wanted to plant it, and this turned out not to be capable of planting. Even so, the seller doesn't have to reimburse the purchaser for the ineffective seeds. So, what do you mean? Even if it was pishtan, my love, zara pishtan the rubilozria zavni. Is not saying that even though pishtan mostly is sold to be planted, we still don't go basaroy because it's a moment, and therefore you can't take away from a machzak. And that is Shmuel's shita. The Gemara says, yeah, you're right. Our Mishnah is taka like Shmuel. Our Mishnah that says that when you sell pishtan and it turns out it doesn't work, even though the roiv is that the person who bought it wanted to plant it and didn't want to eat it, but we don't care. He doesn't have to pay because it's only a roiv, and the roiv is not enough to be mitzi from a muchzak. But it's a tanoi. There's a tana that says fakert. Even though our Mishnah says like this, is a tana that says the other way. The tanya. Someone who sold pears to his friend and he planted them and nothing grew. If it's garden seeds that have no ability, that no one eats them at all, then you chayiv. Then the person who sold it can't say, I thought you want to eat it. These are not edible. They're only used to planting, and they were not effective for planting. Zara pishtan, but if it's zara pishtan, then he's not going to be chayiv. So this is again the shita of Shmuel, and like our Mishnah. The Tanakhama certainly seems to hold like our Mishnah. Rabbi Yosi says, no. I'm sorry. He says in the case of Pishtan, he does have to pay for the zera. So Rabbi Yosi is saying, because there's a roiv that most people buy it for planting, therefore the seller has to reimburse the purchaser, because he could say, listen, I meant to plant it like the roiv, and therefore you have to pay me back. He says like Rav that we go bust to the roiv, Keneged the muchzak. Amrullah, and then there's a third sheet. There's another mandam who says many people buy it for other things, as we're going to see in the Gemara. But what this Tana is saying, the Gemara will explain it, but it's easier if I do it up front. Many people buy a flax seed to eat. Even though we said that 90% of the flaxseed that's bought is used for cultivation to plant, but that's as far as the amount of tonnage. Like people will buy a ton of flaxseed to plant the whole field, and someone who goes to the store to buy flaxseed to eat is only going to buy a cupful. But the amount of people who buy to eat is much higher than the farmers who buy it for cultivation. That means the amount of actual flaxseed sold, most of it is cultivated. But the amount of people who buy it, there's 1 million people who go into the store and buy a cup of flaxseed. So even though the 1 cup at a time doesn't add up to the amount that the 90% that goes into cultivation, but the amount of people, the amount of individual buyers is much more. So he says you go bust at the amount. The roiv is over here. The roiv really cuts the other way. The roiv over here is that you go off bust the roiv of people who are buying it. And roiv the people are buying it to eat. I would have thought that you could probably figure out whether the person isn't planning to eat it or plant it based on how much he buys. But the Gemara says, I guess there's some people who buy a huge amount and store it to eat also. So it's not definitive.
Why would that help?
What do you mean? If you could determine based on how much? Because then it's not the whole question is, can this guy say I intended to eat it? Can the seller say you intended to eat it, and therefore I don't have to reimburse you for the fact that it didn't work?
Gets there with the carcass.
Exactly, whether people intend to shecht it or to eat it. But we said that let's look at how much he paid for it and all the different factors.
You see, the main percent over here too.
Right.
I think there's more people walking to these fancy salad places to buy, 1,000 flaxseed than like the one farmer that buys.
Right. So we're saying there definitely are more people who walk in to buy it. But I'm suggesting let's look at how much you buy.
Exactly.
If you're buying it in a jar, then that's
buying on top of the salad. We know
because it has to be much more going to the amount. The amounts must be much larger for farmers. So come on, man tanoi. If you're going to say the machlekes tanoim that we're saying is reflected between Rav and Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi v'Amruloi, that's not a raya. Travayu basaruba. They're both saying you go basaroiv. The only question is what is the roiv? They're arguing about. Rabbi Yossi says you go basa the roiv. That roiv of the flaxseed that's sold is cultivated, and therefore he does have to reimburse him. And the Amruloi, the last shita, is saying no. The roiv is different. So Mara Azal Amruloi Travayu basaruba. Mara Azal basaruba the inshi, and the Amrulai goes basa the roiv of what more people do. Mazel basaruba is the tree, and the other one goes basa the roiv of the amount of flaxseed. Eli tanakam Rav Yossi, tanakam of Amrulai. So the machlokes of Rav and Shmuel will be that either it's going to be the Tanakama who holds that you don't go basa roiv. He holds like Shmuel and Rav Yossi, or tanakam of Amrulai, meaning that Shmuel. Rav could be either like the Rabbi Yossi or like the Amalek. I don't know why this is really important. This is a totally separate question. I don't know why it makes a difference which one Rav would be saying like. Mahu noisenlei. So now that we say that he doesn't have to pay him back, let's say when he sold him Zarinin seeds for a garden that can't be eaten. So then he has to pay him back. It's not a roiv anymore. What does he have to pay him back? The meizera. Does he have to pay just for the seeds? But he doesn't have to reimburse the purchaser that he tried to plant these seeds that were no good. And he hired workers and he spent time and he wasn't able to cultivate his field. So he has a lot of expenses. He doesn't have to pay that. Some say no. The seller caused the purchaser to lose not just that he paid for the seeds, but also all his expenses involved in trying to plant these seeds that didn't work. Man Yeshayim. Who's the Yeshayim that says you have to even pay for the Yitzah? Rav Shimon Gamliel. This is Rav Shimon Gamliel. Hi, Rav Shimon Gamliel. Where do we see Rav Shimon Gamliel holds like this? Rav Shimon Gamliel the Masnisa. Well, if you'll say that Rav Shimon Gamliel is from our Mishnah, the Gemara is going to have to figure out how you see this. Rav Shimon Gamliel in our Mishnah is not so clear where he says this. The Tanam, we said in our Mishnah, we said the Mishnah is going like Shmuel. Even if you sold Pishtan, which is normally planted, still the seller is not responsible because you don't go after Roy by Kneged Mosek. And we say Ema Sefer. The Sefer says Rav Shimon Gamliel Mezaruni Gina She'ena Nechalan Chai Bechayusan. Rav Shimon Gamliel adds, but if you sell seeds for a garden that are not eaten at all, then everyone agrees you have to be chayv. Even Shmuel says you don't go basa roiv, but if it's something that can't be eaten at all, so obviously it was intended for planting, so then the seller has to reimburse. This is the same thing as the Tanakama. The Tanakama says at Pishtan you have to pay, even though it's a roiv, it's masham, but if it's a vadai, then you do have to pay. And then the Rav Shimon Gamliel says, Avada, you do have to pay. They're saying the same thing. Zera Pishtan, What did Tanakama say? Zerapishtan de Einachai Bachus. You just said Zerapishtan, which it's not a vada, even though it's a roiv, you're not chayiv. Zaruni Gina, She'en Nechalan, Zaruni Gina, which are a vada that they're not eaten, so they're certainly planted chayiv Bachus. Elav Hitzoi Kabeinayu. Elamai. So what is the shita? What is the difference between them? If they both agree that something that is, we don't look at a roiv, but we do look at a vadai, that it's certainly going to be planted, you have to pay back. What's the difference between them? The difference is whether you have to pay itzah. Mar Sava the Mezera, the Tanakama holds you only pay for the zera. The seller only has to reimburse for the zera. Mar Sava af itzah. B'Shem Gamliel is saying even itzah. Maybe it's the other way around. How do we know Rav Shimon Gamliel is the one who says you pay for itzah? We're just deducing they must be having a second machlekes. So why do you say Rav Shimon Gamliel is the one who says you pay for itzah? Halakasha, kol tanoa basra l'tfiya milsa kasi. It's a good thing to keep in mind. Whenever you have a second Tana, you wouldn't say that the first Tana is saying you are chayiv in itzah. Rav Shimon Gamliel adds on that you chayiv for zaroin gina, and he's saying, but you don't pay for itzah. Whenever the second one, it's coming to add on to the first one. So he's coming to add on an additional chiyuv. The later one is normally adding on to the first one. In fact, the Gemara says you're misreading the whole Mishnah. This whole Mishnah, the Tanakama, there's no Tanakama Rav Shimon Gamliel, it's all Rav Shimon Gamliel. The Tanakama of the Mishnah is Rav Shimon Gamliel, that he says, even if you're Zara Pishtan, you're not Chai B'Achrayis, like Shmuel said, Rav Shimon Gamliel Aimer, who the Einachai B'Achrayis. I'm sorry, Shimon Gamliel Aimer, Zarune Gina she'en nechol and Chai B'Achrayis. Because Rav Shimon Gamliel says the only time you are going to be chayiv is Zarune Gina, garden seeds that can't be eaten, so they must be planted, then he's going to be chayiv. So therefore, our Mishnah is not a good source. The Rav Shimon Gamliel is the man who says you chayiv also for itself.
But Rav Shimon Gamliel is only a small chance, no matter how small it is, that it can be used for eating. Then you would be chayiv achusa. The seller could say that. That's why I intended.
Right. We don't go basarayv. We say mama. We don't go basarayv, and you can't take away from a muhsik based on even if it's only a small chance.
So and it stays with the el and you're good to go. It stays with the seller, masheni, right. But it could only be used for planting. Then the chayiv achusa.
Right.
That makes sense. It's a good.
Ella Harav Shimon Gamliel. So this is the source of Shimon Gamliel that he says that not only do you have to pay for the seeds, but also for the itzah. The Tanya, if you gave wheat to a miller, the Lloyd lost a son, and he didn't properly prepare them. They used to soak the grain before grinding it to take out the chaff and the outside part. Since he didn't properly prepare it, so the wheat produced a lower quality of flour because it included the chaff, or he gave kemach lenachtaim ba'afai pasnafluin. He gave bread to the baker, and he made a fallen bread, like he gave him to make a souffle, and it didn't rise. He made the bread. The bread was a dense bread. It didn't rise properly. Behema latavach v'nifla. He gave a behema to a sheichet, and he didn't shecht it properly. It became an avela. Chayiv is chayiv neishuk noisa sacher, because he's a noisa sacher. The Rashbam clarifies that where this Gemara was brought, I think in Bava Kama, it says clearly that he was, because he is a noisa sacher, not because he is getting paid in all these cases. Therefore, he's achrayus. Shimon Gamliel, I'm a noisa loy demei bushasay demei boishes archa. Shimon Gamliel says not only does he have to pay for the flour that he ruined, and for the wheat that he ruined, and for the animal that he made into an avela, he also has to pay for this guy gave the animal. Let's say the case of the animal that became an avela. He gave the animal to the sheikh because he was planning to make a party, and now he has this party and there's no steak because the sheikh messed up. So he's embarrassed. So he has to pay him for that embarrassment, and also the mei boishes archav, and also the people who showed up to eat, and now they're standing around. They feel like dummies. There's nothing to eat. So not only does he have to pay for the damage, he also has to pay baishas. The same din, if someone hired a caterer and the caterer did not come through, you're standing there waiting for him to bring out the food, and instead he brings out crackers and tuna fish. He said nothing worked out. So you don't just have to pay for what you pay the caterer. The caterer also has to pay you the baishas that you have a bunch of people showing up, and the people who showed up are also embarrassed. You see, he adds on. If you add on the fee of baishas, you certainly have to pay the chi of avodah. If the guy who hired the caterer expended money, right? He paid for everyone to come in a bus to get there. So his avodah are also going to have to be paid. So you see, Rav Shimon Gamliel holds that someone who does damage also has to pay for avodah. So this is another thing that doesn't have anything to do with the cheshbon report. Once we're saying a minute gadol, oid minute gadol hayi b'shalayim, mapa prusa al gabe a pesach kozman shemapa prusa orchen nechnatzen. Whenever someone had an inn, they would spread out a sheet over the entranceway to indicate that it's open for business. But when the sheet was taken away, people would know not to come in because the inn was not open for business. Not halacha, just a minute.
Or the red carpet.
Right, or the opposite of a red carpet, right?